All right. Well, hey there. This is Breakfast with the Bible. We are in Psalm 62. And today we're really only going to cover the first 7 verses. In its entirety is 12 verses, but there's a transition between verse 7 and verse 8, which kind of led me to think that it was a good place to stop. And then the next one we'll pick up and cover the last half of this psalm. So it is to the chief musician to Jeduthun, a psalm of David. Truly, my soul waiteth upon God. From him cometh my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. How long will ye imagine mischief against a man? Ye shall be slain, all of you. As a bowing wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence. They consult to cast him down from his excellency. They delight in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Selah. My soul, wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. In God is my salvation and my glory, the rock of my strength, and my refuge is in God. So this name in the superscription, Jeduthun, is based on First Chronicles. He appears to be one of the Levitical musicians. It's only mentioned a few times, but he is a musician mentioned in First Chronicles. Possibly David wrote this for him to direct the worship. Maybe this was he wrote this so Jeduthun would have something to play or something to lead with. But regardless, we can understand that this was a psalm for worship, a psalm for praise, and there's even a little bit of lament and question in here. But we can see that it's a psalm of confidence and trust, and which of course in our study in the Psalms shouldn't surprise us, because most, if not all, of David's Psalms have some element of confidence or trust or really just confident expectation in who God is and what God does for David and through David, in spite of everything he deals with. So verse 1 says, truly my soul waiteth upon God, from him cometh my salvation. This word truly, this word is declarative. David is saying completely, without reservation. It is an absolute. My soul waits silently. This silence is an overwhelming peace. Silence indicates little or no anxiety, no worry, not a twiddling of the thumbs or tapping of the foot. This is a patient expectation, patient, expectant, certain waiting upon God. This is truly, with all honesty, with everything I am, truly. There's no question about it. This is how it is. My soul silently waits expectantly on God. And because this song was given to the musician, there was an audience, even possibly others who would sing, encouraging them. So not only David is saying this in and of himself, but he wants others to sing it as well. He wants a group, a crowd, a congregation, if you will, to sing, truly, my soul waits upon God. He wants them to agree. He wants them to be of one mind, to think, to agree with this. Truly my soul waits upon God. Truly our soul. Let's say it, in a group setting. Our soul waits upon God. From him cometh our salvation. Now, if we sing this in those kinds of words, there's a unity there. And David, again, if he's given it to a worship leader, a worship instructor, or somebody in the choir or the music group, whatever it is, he intends on others hearing it and singing it and partaking in this. So the idea that there should be an agreement is obvious there. So in verse 2, he only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. David is describing God's absolute stability and explains it as his reason for confidence. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. And that's not simply just defender, but that is my strong tower. It's a military reference. He is my wall that protects me. And I shall not be greatly moved. Again, this is David's confidence in God as his rock and his salvation and his defense. Because of that, I shall not be greatly moved. If we lived our lives with the assurance that God alone is our rock and our salvation, as well as our defense or strong tower, we could confidently proclaim that we cannot be shaken. But so many of us, myself included, will at various points in time forget that God only is our rock and our salvation. And sometimes we feel like we've been moved and affected and discouraged and set off course. And really it's because we've taken our eyes off of Christ. We've managed to forget for a moment that God only should be our rock and our salvation. We trust in riches, we trust in our job, we trust in whatever you want to put in that space, forgetting that God alone should be our source of stability, our source of security, our source of sufficiency, regardless of what happens around us. And sometimes the reason we get moved is because we've allowed something, material or whatever, financial, to take that place of being our rock. And when it moves, when that kind of thing that we've put we've leaned upon gets messed up or gets ruined or moved, then we've been moved because we've been leaning against something that isn't going to stand on its own. God alone cannot be moved no matter what we do. God isn't, you can't convince him to go against himself. So God is always faithful. God is always true. God is always honest. God never breaks a promise. He never gives a promise he doesn't intend to keep. And so the rock of God cannot be moved. And so if we rely upon that as our stability, then we won't be moved either, because we're leaning against something that is immovable. A little bit of redundance there, but I think you get my point. We find ourselves shaken when we lose sight of the truth that God is a rock, and he is our salvation, and he is our defense. The question I have here is, do you wait patiently on God? Do you find yourself easily shaken? You get all upheaved because of various circumstances that change or things that go on in your life that you just didn't expect. Consider your perspective. Evaluate it. Your trust in God to be your only rock. Think about, what am I putting my trust in? What am I putting my faith in? What am I creating what am I trying to say? What am I putting in place to ensure my happiness or my stability? What am I leaning against? Is it God, or is it my bank account, or is it my career, or is it any number of things? When you're easily moved, when you find yourself shaken and discouraged so easily, I'm not going to say that these things can't happen even if you're focused on God. David was discouraged numerous times. But what we're looking at here is David never forgot, even though he felt discouraged. And we've covered this various different times. in numerous Psalms. What David felt and what David knew weren't always the same thing. So we can feel discouraged. Doesn't change the fact that we know who God is and we know what God stands for. But when we find ourselves, the question here is, how easily are you discouraged? How easily are you moved? Is it little things that happen? Is it stuff that you can just kind of brush off? You should be able to brush off and just kind of move on. Does it, is it stress at work? Is it stress at home? Is it really unnecessary stress of stuff that you could just say, it's not worth the trouble I'm putting myself in for this, whatever it is. If you're that easily moved, if it happens all the time, or you can't feel like you catch a break and you just up and down with the emotions and all this kind of stuff, consider your perspective. Consider what you're focused on. This is what David is talking about. I shall not be greatly moved, because I'm declaring, I'm proclaiming that he alone is my rock and my salvation and my defense. Because of this truth, I shall not be greatly moved. Verse 3, how long will ye imagine mischief against a man? You shall be slain, all of you, as a bowing wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence. So David speaks of God in the first two verses, and then he addresses his enemies in verses 3 and 4. How long will you persist? How long will you continue to come against? When will you give up? This is what David is saying. He even warned them of what will happen if they continue. You shall be slain, all of you. Judgment is inevitable. Now, David wasn't issuing some kind of empty threat from himself. He was declaring what was true. David was explaining, in essence, to the enemies that God will judge. God will handle it at some point. When will you realize? When will you give up? When will you stop pushing and rebelling against God? And it's something that this is no different than what we as believers should do. We should warn. We should warn those who rebel, not of impending doom administered by our own hand, but of promised judgment from God to unrepentant rebellion. It isn't going around and pointing fingers and say, get right now, or judgment is coming. We don't necessarily want to put ourselves in that kind of position, but that doesn't change the fact that it's true. But we want to draw them to Christ, not chase them away, not put a wall between us and them. We want to convince them. We want to be an example of Christ in that moment, to where we come at them gently. What you're doing is wrong. What you're doing, the way you're living, the way you're rebelling against God is going to end up someplace you don't want to be. And God warns all throughout Scripture. And a God who loves is a God who warns. He's preparing. He's saying, listen, you don't want to go that way. Trust me. And here's the Old Testament to show what happens. These are examples for you. Don't go down that road. God warns us because he cares. You warn your children, don't run out in the street. There are cars that go speeding by, sometimes faster than they're supposed to. Don't go out in the street. Trust me, you don't want to do that. So we warn them because we love them. God sets out warnings because he desires for us to turn to him and to lean on him. Now, verse 3, there's a debate on who the last part of this verse is referring to. And it says, "You shall, as a bowing wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence." There's debate on whether it's David's enemies or David himself. However, most most believe that the image is clear enough to determine that David is still speaking of his enemies. Again, you can you can determine how you want to. I know there are some biblical translations that kind of make it seem like David is speaking of himself. And really, either way you come out on that one, it doesn't change the context of the psalm as a whole. But Spurgeon wrote, "Boastful persecutors bulge and swell with pride, but they are only as a bulging wall ready to fall in a heap. They lean forward to seize their prey, but it is only as a tottering fence inclines to the earth, upon which it will soon lie at length." Verse 4, "They only consult to cast him down from his excellency. They delight in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Selah." This verse speaks of their agenda, their only purpose, their only drive is to bring down the man of God in deceit and two-facedness. And it sounds a lot like society's agenda today, bringing down men of God, bringing down conservative values and traditional biblical values, bringing down the truth and changing it into a lie. And they destroy that which we try to uphold with lies and hypocrisy and pretending to be one thing and really being another. David didn't sit quietly and just listen to them. He didn't just let them speak and be quiet and say, okay, well, say what you want to say. David was jealous for God. David stood up when God was mocked. You remember David and Goliath, the story when really the issue that David had with Goliath was the fact that he was mocking God. Now, he was just a kid then. David here is speaking against his enemies who constantly are opposed to the God of Israel. He didn't sit quietly. He spoke up. He rebuked. He stood up confidently. That's exactly what we need to do. We don't cower when society and culture is trying to push against it. We stand firm. We hold, like we spoke of a few videos ago, keep that banner high. Don't set that banner down. And once again, we end this verse with Selah, which is an absolute appropriate moment for reflection. We think of God's being my rock and my salvation, my defense, and understanding and remembering the judgment that God's going to bring upon his enemies. Now, verse 5, "My soul, wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is from him." We find David essentially repeating verse 1 only verse 1. Only in verse 1, he made a declaration, and here in verse 5, he's speaking directly to his soul. Now, David has done this a couple of times in previous Psalms. He's speaking to his own soul with an urge to remain in the place of trust and surrender to God. So he's speaking to himself, saying, okay, don't forget, keep focused, keep your mind on Christ, keep your mind on God. Don't take your eyes off. Okay? And we would do well to make a practice of this. Speak to your soul. Remind it of the promises of God. Preach the gospel to yourself. Meditate on it constantly, reminding yourself, my soul, wait upon God. Don't give up. My expectation is from him. I am confident in God's ability to respond and to do what's right. Now, this phrase, only upon God, in verse 5, is vital. Now, Trapp wrote, they trust not God at all who trust in him not alone. He that stands with one foot on a rock and another foot upon a quicksand will sink and perish, as certainly as he that standeth with both feet upon a quicksand. David knew this, and therefore calleth earnestly upon his soul to trust only upon God. Verse 6, he only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. Again, David repeats verse 2 here, assuring himself. This is the essence of a believer's pep talk. Okay? He only is my rock. He is my salvation. He's my defense. I shall not be moved. David is reversing, repeating this to himself. Don't forget this. Now, an illustration for you in the movie Finding Nemo. This is a kind of a comical illustration, but if you have children or familiar with it, you'll recognize it, and it should kind of bring it together. The character Dory repeats a phrase to herself that she was taught by her parents. Just keep swimming. David's, when she would get afraid or forget, she had this, she would tend to forget stuff. She had a forgetful, she had a real short memory because she would just get distracted and she would think about this stuff or that stuff. And her parents taught her to repeat this phrase, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So she would focus on what she was doing and thinking, okay, and she would repeat this to herself because she was erasing all distractions because she was focused on one thing. David's example here is as simple as just keep waiting, just keep trusting, just keep focused on what's important in order to get through troubles and fears and confusion and whatnot. David here in this few verses is saying, just keep swimming. Don't look to the left or to the right. Just focus on God. Just keep waiting. And remember these things. God is my rock. God is my salvation. God is my defense. God is my rock. God is my salvation. God is my defense. Build that in yourself to remember these things. And when affliction or something comes against you, opposition, if you're repeating this kind of stuff, you're likely to have a better outlook on it. Now, because David uses this repetition and emphasizes it, it's rational to assume that he was tempted, or at the very least had an opportunity to trust in other things, but he reminds himself of where his trust should be. The fact that he's reminding himself leads us to believe that he could have tried to trust in other things. The reason Dory would repeat this just keep swimming is because she was in an ocean of all kinds of distractions. So it's fair to assume that this is why David is doing this. Now, for the very reason given in verse 7, it says, listen to what Spurgeon said about these verses. Observe how the psalmist brands his own initials upon every name which he rejoicingly gives to his God. My expectation, my rock, my salvation, my glory, my strength, my refuge. He is not content to know that the Lord is all these things. He acts in faith towards him and lays claim to him under every character. David's expression here is not only is God a rock, God a salvation for those, a defense for those. God is mine. David is laying claim in a personal sense. God is my salvation. God is my rock. I'm leaning on him. I'm trusting him. This is my focus. God is my rock. Now, you're not saying it's yours and nobody else's, but there's a connection there. There's a familiarity there. That's God is my rock. And it is that the phrase of such a personal connection, such an intimate belonging, that you can trust God in that sense with everything that you have. So when we move on to verses 8 to 12, we'll jump into a pretty interesting transition between 7 and 8. And hopefully, if things go right, that will be tomorrow. So thank you for watching. I pray it blessed you. Again, like, subscribe, follow, do all those cool things that you people do. Share it with your friends. Tell me if you like it. Tell me if you don't like it. Jump over to Twitter and say hi there or whatever you're going to do. And just keep trusting. Thank you, and God bless.